This right here is the Synido TempoPAD C16. It is a Bluetooth MIDI controller, which means we can use it completely wirelessly to make performances like this. Let's walk through all the features of the controller, and then later I'm going to talk to you about some looping techniques with the C16. I have been having tons of fun with this controller. But let's start with the basics. We've got 16 velocity sensitive pads. They are very good quality pads. I would say the holy grail of pads right now is something like the Ableton Push 3. Those are basically like feather touch. You barely have to touch them to get a signal. That's not exactly where we're at with the C16. I can't just barely touch the pads, but I can get in there with a very light touch. And it feels very good to finger drum on. The orange knob and buttons at the top are used to navigate some menus. I'll talk about those in a bit. But we have 8 assignable encoders here. These are endless encoders, along with 4 faders and 12 buttons that can be either momentary or toggle. We'll also talk about what that means later. Now, with all of those controls, yes, we only have 16 pads, 8 knobs, 4 faders, etc., but we also have banks for all of those things. So here we've got bank buttons, A, B, C, and D. So for the pads, we've got 4 banks of 16 pads, meaning that all 4 banks can contain 16 unique pads that we can program in different ways. And the same thing goes for all the controls. We have control banks, A, B, C, and D. So essentially 8 knobs becomes 32 knobs. 4 faders becomes 16 faders. We just have to switch between the different banks to access them. We've got play, stop, and record transport buttons here that do need to be mapped. And that is something that we need to point out right away about this controller. Some MIDI controllers come with some type of DAW integration where they're sort of automatically mapped to your music making software. This is a controller you will have to do custom mapping with, which is not too difficult. I've covered the basics of that in another video, and we'll talk about how I actually custom map this controller in a bit. But sticking with the buttons on the surface here, I've got my Bluetooth button right here, which is illuminated blue because I'm already connected to my Mac. Now, Mac Bluetooth MIDI is fairly easy to connect. I know Windows can be more challenging, but in the user guide for the C16, there's pretty clear step-by-step instructions for Windows users. Next to the Bluetooth button, we've got a velocity button, which allows us to change our velocity curve, which essentially is like the sensitivity or the difference from a soft pressure to a high pressure, and that can affect your finger drumming style. And there's also a fixed velocity mode, so that no matter how hard or soft I hit these pads, they will always play at the same velocity. And speaking of velocity, we also have a 16 level button. So if I play the kick drum here, and then I turn 16 levels on, now all 16 pads will each be the kick drum, but at different velocity levels. So super quiet or as loud as it can be. This is fun for creating more groovy patterns with accents. Now, the pad mode that I'm in right now is a custom mode, but if I press the mode button, I'll go into note mode. Now, the yellow pads in this mode are the C major scale, but with the purple notes, we have a full chromatic note layout, which we can change the octave of with the octave buttons up here. Switching back to custom mode, which is our typical drumming mode, if you actually hold this mode button down, we can actually go from having the pads just be on when we press them to now they're always on, but turn off when we press them. You can save battery by keeping the lights off most of the time, or if you just want to look cool, you can keep the lights on all the time. Another really interesting feature is the step sequencer. If I turn step sequencer on and I hold step and press my kick drum pad, we can now sequence the kick drum. Press play. Now I can hold step again and press my snare to select my snare and follow that through. We can do some hi-hats as well. and we can get a little groove going. Now, this is a relatively limited step sequencer in that it's only 16 steps, and there's really no special features. There's no sort of pattern mode. There's no probability or mutation or anything like that. It's just a very basic step sequencer, which you can also record live into. Here, let me select open hi-hat. Okay, that's it. Oh, okay, we got a little lost in the sauce there. Like I said, very basic step sequencer, but I do want to point out that Synido has included some great MIDI connectivity here, the MIDI through, the MIDI out, and the MIDI input jacks on the back. So if you pair this controller with some hardware, I could see you getting some use out of the sequencer, but would have been cool to see a few more features baked into that. The ability to store more patterns or do a longer sequence maybe. We've also got a note repeat, and we can use these controls up here to control things like the time division. So we can go to 30-second notes or eighths. We can also change the swing, the gate, as well as the overall tempo, which there's also a tap tempo here. And this controller can also be synced to external tempo as well. The battery is internal. I know some people are not a fan of that because it means one day if the battery stops working, well, then it's not going to be easily replaceable. I am personally of two minds for that because I have gear that I have to recharge AA's for, and that's kind of a pain. Having USB chargeable gear is definitely my preference. And on that point, we also have USB-C port on the back as well, which you'll use to charge or connect to a computer. You don't have to use it with Bluetooth MIDI. All right, but how do we actually use this thing? How did I use it to put together a full looping performance? Let's talk about that. Now, I want to also say there's a lot of very basic fundamentals that I might skim over in this explanation, but please allow this video to be the start of a branching pathway for you if I go over something that you don't quite understand. I'm going to link a bunch of videos down below that go into much more detail explaining some very fundamental concepts that I think can help you a lot if you get confused along the way during this explanation. But at a very basic level, we're in Bank A. I have some drum sounds here. Now, I talked about doing a lot of custom mapping, but we're not really in that territory yet because by default, Bank A in the custom mode lines up perfectly with our drum rack here in Ableton Live, and it will line up with most drum machines and other DAWs, I believe, where this note, which is C1 technically, usually lines up with the spot a kick drum goes. And a fundamental part of this performance relies on filling up this drum rack with lots of samples, not just drums. As you can hear, we've got chimes, vocal samples, I've got chord chops. I've even got a percussion loop here that just plays through every time I launch it. So without recording or looping anything, I can sit here and just play. I don't even have to loop or anything, right? I can just play this pattern all day. But what if I want to start to add other layers and things? That's where looping comes in handy. So we're going to go into Ableton Live's session view. You can see I have two clips here. Just ignore those for now. And I'm going to create a new clip and I'm going to make it a total of 4 bars long. So now we have an empty 4-bar clip. Now my record button on the transport is MIDI mapped to my session record button, which means if this clip is selected and I press record, we will start recording into that clip after the count in. So let me demonstrate that. I'm going to press record and watch the notes record into this 4-bar loop. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now that loops. It comes back around again and I've got those notes recorded in. But also we're still in record mode. So if I want to add notes, these get added in. So I can continue this process, add in the chords. little vocal sample, bass, and suddenly the whole track is building up. And now that loop just exists, right? So in my performance, pressing stop there to stop everything. So in my performance, I gradually built up on the beat. You can play one part at a time, or you can play multiple. Whatever it is, it gets recorded into that clip. Now with that loop playing, if I turn record off, I'm no longer recording. So anything I launch, like that vocal sample, it's just gonna float on top and it's not gonna record when it loops back around. And also as the beat plays, I can switch over to another pad bank, which I have assigned to this instrument track in Ableton Live, which has a pure lo-fi preset by Arturia. But I really like the sound of this instrument. And on this set of pads, bank D, I've actually got a B minor pentatonic scale. So whereas bank A is a group of chromatic notes for drum rack, bank D is a specific scale. Now, how do we actually change that? How do we change what these notes actually are? And you can even see that the color is different in bank D than bank A, right? And also, look at my drum rack. My drum rack is armed. My pure lo-fi track is just set to monitor all the notes that are coming in. But if you take a closer look, the drum rack only receives MIDI from channel 1, and the pure lo-fi track, this keyboard track, receives MIDI from channel 4. So this plays a big role in utilizing a single controller to control multiple things. And what's very cool about that is we can do a lot of that customization right from the controller. If I hold the encoder down and I press a pad, we get a list of settings. We can change whether these pads are notes or CCs, more like kind of buttons, or even program changes. We can change what note the pad actually is. That's how I'm able to build up a minor pentatonic scale here. And we can even change the MIDI channel. So we can use the same controller, but when I play here, it's drums. When I switch banks, it's on a different MIDI channel, which I can route to a different track in my DAW. You can also utilize this with hardware as well. So between playing and looping things and improvising with an instrument on top, we can get pretty far in the performance, but what happens when I want this loop to stop playing, or make changes to this loop? We're kind of locked in, right? But I'm using some custom mappings on the buttons down here to make some changes to the music. First, I can take out my kick drum, I can take out that percussion loop, and I can take out the bass. So we're just left with sort of the top layer. Also on these buttons, I have some beat repeats. This S button is a beat repeat for the drums, while this one is a beat repeat for the melodic elements. So that's one way we can create some change in our section. And let me also point out that when I press one of these buttons, the light stays illuminated, which means the kick has turned back on. It's permanently on. But when I press this button here, it only illuminates when I'm pressing it. This is a particular MIDI option. You can either be in momentary mode or toggle mode. Think of toggle mode like a light switch: off, on, off, on. Think of momentary as it's only going to be on when you're pressing it, the moment you're pressing it. So obviously, if I've got this beat playing, I never want that to just hold like this. I want it to just happen in the moment that I'm pressing the button. But the kick, I want to be able to turn that off and on. The customization that I did with the pads also follows through on all these other controls. Hold the encoder, press the button, turn the knob, move the fader that you want to adjust, and you can change all these things about the settings, and you can see that one of the settings in this menu is trigger momentary or toggle. We're going to leave it on momentary for now. Synido does have a really great desktop editor, which you can use the auto-populate function to change the entire settings of a bank all at once. It's pretty convenient. But what is not convenient is if you were using this with a mobile setup, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is having to go to your computer to make those edits. You don't have to do that. You can do it right from the controller. Now, we've got to this section where I took out the bass, the kick, the perks. We've also got some effects that we can dial in. Kind of like some filter delays for the drums, as well as the melodic elements. So like individual controls for those two different elements. But then also on the master, just affect everything. Perfect for transitions. This fader right here is the level of the drums. So I can totally pull the drums out. They're still playing. I've just pulled down the volume fader. We've also got a filter for the drums, a kind of stutter for the melodic elements. Overall filter for the master track. So with just those custom effect mappings, the beat repeats, plus the filter changes, delays, etc., I have more to improvise with than just notes. So muting things out of our mix, dialing in some effects, pulling some volumes down, that's a good way to create a new section. New musical ideas can come in from bank B. Where I've got some vocal samples, kind of this high synth thing, which makes us feel something, I guess you could say. Then I've got another kind of percussion loop here as well to sort of build up. And we can always come back to our record button to layer those things in, and that's how we build up towards the end of the track. All the samples in bank B are in the drum rack. They're just in the 16 pads above bank A. So this style of performance is very akin to how like early finger drumming and MPC performances were created, utilizing one drum rack, loading up all your samples into it, moving between banks to add different sounds. It's a very fun way to perform, and one thing I want to take advantage of is the fact that we have so many banks, control banks, and pad banks. So I'm wondering if I could essentially do an entire track on bank A, control and pad bank, and then move through the banks and do like a whole live set with maybe 4 tracks just with the C16. If you'd like me to try to experiment doing that and make a video out of it, let me know. But before we finish here, I do want to mention that the Synido TempoPAD C16 is like the perfect option for mobile beat making. I'm becoming a bigger and bigger fan of iOS music production, mobile music production. Love my iPad mini. Synido TempoPAD C16 shows up right here in Koala Sampler. And ignore my little janky cable situation, but we can start making beats right away with the iPad, no wires, which is more important with mobile beat making because we know that these mobile devices don't come with headphone jacks anymore. So if your USB port on your mobile device is being taken up by a dongle for your headphones, then a Bluetooth MIDI controller that you don't need to plug into the mobile device is the way to go. So in Koala, I'm just automatically up and running here. I can play the notes in my grid, but if I wanted to go to like the perform mode, there's also a MIDI mapping setting in Koala. So I can tap on what I want to map and I can map it to these individual controls right here on the tempo pad. So let's even map our play button to the play button. That makes sense to me. Stop mapping, press play. So you can see that that was very easy. It didn't take me long at all. We can just quickly map all those controls and you can basically do a full beat set, this controller plus Koala. Could you do it with just Koala in your touchscreen? Yes, you could, but playing on these big pads is definitely better than playing on a touchscreen. So what do we think about the TempoPAD C16? I have been waiting for a Bluetooth pad controller that wasn't just pads because I really want to take advantage of all of these other controls. The fact that we have multiple banks to map and that we can edit each and every control, MIDI channel, what note it's playing, etc. right from the controller, along with all this MIDI hookups, which maybe we could use this with some hardware in the future. I'm really excited about this controller. There's been a lot of thought put into the design here, and I'm curious to hear how you might use it. Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you again to Synido for sponsoring this video.